Welcome to today's Enroute webinar. Today, Aaron Clapp will be our presenter as usual. Aaron is the Director of all training here at SAI and knows everything there is to know about Enroute. So today he will be talking about using 3D tools in Enroute, and then if you have any questions afterwards, we will open it up for questions and answers. And it could be about 3D tools, or if you have another question about Enroute, you can ask that as well. And Aaron will do his best to answer as many of those as we can. And we will be recording today's webinar. So we will post it to our YouTube channel after we're done, and we'll send everyone out a link. So if you want to review it later or share it with someone else, we'll send you a link to the recording. And I think that's about everything. So let's get started. Aaron, take it away.
All right, sounds good. So just as a preface here, last month, we talked about the basics of 3D. So if at any point you get lost and there's some things that maybe we don't cover or we kind of skip over, go ahead and go back to that video, check it out. It's on our YouTube channel. It'll be worth a watch. This is going to be kind of a series that we're going to be doing, and I'll mention this probably every webinar, but we're going to kind of be doing some more 3D style related videos, and they kind of build on each other a little bit. So if you haven't checked it out, watch this webinar and then go back to the other one if you need some more clarification on the basics of 3D. So today we wanted to look over just several different tools inside of Enroute regarding 3D. Now, one of the things we're probably going to simply avoid today is we're not going to necessarily talk about each one of the textures and how they work. We kind of discussed those in a real brief way in our last webinar, so check that out to kind of get a brief picture of that. But these are fairly simple to create and to kind of mess around with, and they're really well lending to for you to play with them and kind of make some changes, and they're pretty easy to work with. So the ones that we want to talk about today is we're going to talk about creating some surfaces. So we're going to use Sweep to Rails. We're going to use the Revolve tool. We're going to use the Chamfer tool. And then we're also going to do the mesh from, create a relief from a mesh. So if you have a 3D object that you've imported and you want to convert it into something that Enroute can recognize, we're going to talk about that as well. So just to kind of get started off, I'm going to open up a file that we kind of had ready to go here. We're going to kind of go through some different things. So first one I want to take a look at is Sweep to Rails. Sweep to Rails is a real simple tool that allows us to take a profile or the shape of an object and then kind of sweep it along two rails, creating a part or a crown molding is one of the popular examples for this. So let's just take a look here. So first of all, I'm going to actually take this, and I was messing around with this earlier. And what I've done is I've simply drawn a square. And this is a, we're going fairly simple here. And I'm going to probably go a little bit quick. So if you have any questions or if you miss something, obviously this is going to be recorded and you'll get the link. So there's a lot to talk about, so I kind of want to get through some of it. So first of all, I just decided I'm going to make a square, not any particular height or size. I just drew this square and then I placed two rails on it. Now these rails don't necessarily have to be touching the edge of the part, but I did it that way just to make things a little bit easier for me so that I could make my object here, or my my profile, the same size as the square. So this is fairly simple, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to where I started with this, where I drew these two lines. And to get these to snap to the edge, I just simply selected one of the lines. I went into my move commands, and then I told the snap to mid, or I turned on the snap to midpoint. And then I just clicked on the center of this object and then snapped it to the center there. I can hit close again, and I can select that line, hit move, snap it to the center, and I've got these snapped right to the edge. This will allow me to make sure that my profile stays within these two rails. So now all I have to do is, like we talked about in our last webinar, you have to have a starting point for your relief. So we have to at least have a relief put on there. So I'm going to select this rectangle. I'm going to say create relief, or go to surface, create relief. I'm going to say add flat, and I'm going to put 0 and 0 for the base and the height, because all I want is just a starting point, a flat, no thickness relief. And we kind of talked about that last time. Hit apply. This gives me a flat, no thickness relief for me to be able to use the tool. If I do not have a relief selected, it will not allow me to use this tool. So let's hit undo for a second. I select this and go to surface. You'll notice that all of them are grayed out. So this is why it's important to have that relief. So we're going to go ahead and reapply the relief again. All right. Now with sweep to rails, these kind of have a little bit of a step-by-step process. So I'm going to, first of all, I need to select the relief that I want to modify. That's really important. I select the relief that I want to modify. I go to surface, and I'm going to go to sweep to rails. Now, these rails can be as complicated or as simple as this. They can be simple little lines. They can be curved. They can follow arcs. They can go around things. They can use all sorts of different shapes. So the rails don't have to be perfectly straight. Just in this case, I'm going to be creating a piece of crown molding, which is a pretty common thing to do in this example today. So I've got my relief selected. I'm in my sweep to rails. And then all I have to do is follow the instructions down here. Now, in this particular case, because we're starting off from a 0 relief, or flat, no thickness relief, I'm going to say add to relief. If you were adding this to another particular object, you may want to, like another relief or your stacking effects, you might want to use these options down here, which we talked about in our last episode. So go check that out if you're not familiar with what these objects do. So I'm going to say add to relief. I'm going to say just set it to normal. You can have it do one of these options if you want to. Again, check our last one, if our last webinar, if you want more information about these. Main thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to say add normal. I'm going to leave my height and base at 0 because I don't really need a base. I actually have that built into my profile right here. And so the thing it asked me to do is it says select the first rail. So in this case, depending on the graphic or depending on what you're trying to do, you may or may not need to choose a specific one. In this particular case, it doesn't really matter which I do first because it's not dependent on that. But I'm going to choose this one first. I'm going to hit next and then choose this one second. Now, if you had a very intricate design, there might be cases where you need to choose certain rails first and certain rails second. So just be aware of that. Then it says select the second rail. I did that already. I hit next. And then it says select the sweep sections. Now for this particular tool, the way that we do that is we click on the object or the profile that we want to use for this particular run. So I'm going to left click on my profile. And this is just a profile, by the way, before we actually go any farther. I got this profile off the internet. I just went onto Google and typed in, I think it was just trim profile. And there was a bunch of images online. I just imported an image and I vectorized it real quick. And what I like to do is I take the bottom off. So it makes it a little bit easier for the sweep to rails to function a little bit better. So what I do is if you have a shape like this, you can just simply explode the drawing, delete the lines in between here so that you have a line like this, and then just remerge it together. So it's that easy. I'm going to click it once, and you'll notice that up here we get a green line. That means that we're starting here, and we're going to sweep it down. And so I can click this again. I'm going to click it. I have to click it at least twice. If I click it twice, now the second one, it means we're going to sweep from here down to here. Now I can keep, I could keep clicking this, or I could actually use this in a way that, so for example, maybe for my start, I have one particular profile I want to use, but then by the time I get down to the bottom, I have a different profile I want to use. So I can use different profiles if I want to do this. So I could click this one and then click a different one for the bottom one, and it would transition between the two. So that's possible as well. For now, we're just looking to keep this the same. So I click it a minimum of twice. That creates my green lines that indicates that that's going to sweep between these two sections. And all I have to do is hit apply. Once I've done that, I'm going to turn on my light bulb to see the rendered preview. And I'm going to go to my perspective view and get my thing out of the way there. And just like that, now we've created some molding in the same shape of what I had over here. So just like that, I can very easily and very simply create crown molding. I could do this for arched sections, curved sections, square sections, a bunch of different ways that I can do that. So that's your simple sweep to Rails. Very, very simple, very, very easy to use. The one thing that you do want to just keep an eye out for is your orientation. So let's actually go back here for a second. I'm going to hit undo, and we're going to use the same thing, sweep to Rails. Select the first rail, hit next. Select the second rail, hit next. And I'm going to choose this one instead, and we'll see what results we get. As you can see, we got nothing. So this does make a difference. So orientation is kind of important. So when you are using this tool, just be aware that orientation is kind of crucial. This orientation for this particular object does not work. Now, if I were to rotate my object so it was going the other direction, then it would work. So if I were to rotate it this direction, I would have to do this, and now this will work. So just be aware of that. Rotation and positioning of your profile does make a difference. So if you see that something doesn't happen, maybe go back, change one thing, maybe change the orientation or the angle or something like that. That'll make a big difference. All right, so let's move on to our next tool. I'm going to open up another file here. In fact, I'm going to close this one first. Since I'm using my laptop at home, I want to do this, close those, and let's go to our Revolve tool. Here's an interesting tool. So this one again is under our surface menu, and it's under Create Surfaces and Revolve. Now there's two different ways that you can use this particular tool. I'm going to drag that out there for you. Again, I've created a flat, no thickness relief by selecting the object and applying a relief to it. That's because we have to have that to get started. So I've created my relief. I have a small little profile here that I want it to revolve around. So I go to my 3D relief, I select it, I go to Surface, I go to Create Surfaces, and then I select Revolve. I'm going to say Add in this case. I'm going to also say Normal, no base height or no base or height. I'm just going to let it scale based on how this works, just as this. And then what I did was I actually just lined this line up so it purposely or perfectly matches up with the edge. Now, again, most of these tools are going to have a small example or a kind of a click-through walkthrough kind of to tell you what you need to have. So in this case, it's saying select the contours that are going to be revolved. Okay, so in this case, I want to revolve this particular object right here, or this particular shape. And I have very specifically placed it on top of the relief, because what Enroute's going to do is it's going to revolve it right in the same position that it's in. And so all I have to do is say select the contours. I've done that. It's highlighted blue now. You can kind of see that it highlighted it for me. I hit next, and then I'm going to hit the check mark. This case, we'll talk about that here in a minute, but we're going to skip that option. Hit apply. That doesn't look like it's done much, but if we go to our preview, you can see that now we've created this little cone type shape. Kind of looks like the front of like an engine or something, like an airplane engine. So we've got this interesting little cone shape, and now I can go out and cut this. So this is kind of a unique Revolve tool that I set to 180 degrees. Now, one of the other things that I can do with this particular tool is, if I don't want to necessarily use the sweep here, that additional option, I'm going to delete this. I can use like a line, for example, like this, and I can use a line to tell it where to sweep around. So we'll just kind of briefly look at that. So create surfaces, revolve, select the contours to be revolved. That's going to be this one here. Next, and then it says select the axis of revolution. So then I can just click on this, and then I can tell it that's the axis I want to revolve, and it's going to give you the same result. You may want to do this way in case it's easier to see the relief, or to see the objects that you've drawn on the screen, or if you only want it to partially revolve around a certain area, you can do that. Also, I forgot to mention here in the first one, but the way that I was able to do that was I was able to create that by using the start angle is 0 and then 180. So that gave me that particular result. So that's the Revolve tool. And again, another really simple, easy to use tool, not too complicated. Some of the things you just have to remember is, if you're not going to use a contour line like this, the best thing to do is just to place this object right on top of the object being on top of the relief. So we would just put it on the relief so that it creates that relief right there on top of it, because it just revolves it in place if you don't tell it where to revolve. Let's open up another file here. This one's going to be another one of those commonly used tools. So let's take a look at the chamfer tool. Close that one. All right, so here's the chamfer tool. And what we're going to do is, again, we did the same thing here. I'm actually going to walk us through that again, just so that we have it. I've created this shape right here. And what I've done is I'm going to grab these two objects. We'll go to Surface, Add, create our flat, no thickness relief. And these shapes over here, by the way, on the right, this is what it produces. But we're going to kind of step through the process here. So in this case, I'm going to use this little profile right here, this little kind of curvy profile that I made. So I'm going to select my relief. This time we're going to go to Chamfer, and I'm going to say Chamfer. What I can do is I'm going to say Add to Relief, because we're just adding it to our base. And I'm going to do center line on this one, and we're going to leave the base at 0. So now it tells me select the chamfering contour for the shapes. So this is going to be the contour that I want the shape to turn out like. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to hit next, and then I can select the chamfering contour for the holes. So basically, I can actually have it do both sides if I want to. We'll take a look at that here, what that looks like in a moment. But for now, I'm just going to say this is an optional thing. I'm just going to say use the same profile or the same contour for both sides. Hit apply, and this is what I get. So what we get here is, and you'll see kind of what happens down here as well. I had those listed here, but it now creates for us a nice relief. It goes all the way around. Now, this is not a mitered corner. This is based off the center line. So the center line is right down the middle. And so you will see some things that happen kind of in the corner here. This may be the desired effect that you want. You may want the edges to be rounded and things like that. That's okay in this case. So this is the first thing that it does. We can kind of rotate that around here. We can see how it's created these corners. And again, because the object is wider at this corner, that makes the object kind of protrude a little bit higher here. But that's just the nature of center line contours. Let's go back. I'm going to hit undo, undo. So we're back to our main one right here. And we're going to go back to our chamfer. This time I'm going to do a miter. We're going to do the same thing. Select the chamfering contour for the shapes. Click on this here. We hit next. I'm going to, again, just say use the same one for both sides. Apply. And now we get a slightly different result. Now you can see that the height has remained constant throughout it. And we're getting this nice chamfered corners here. So imagine if you were putting together molding around a door or something like that, you chamfer the corners or you kind of cut them at an angle so that they match up perfectly. That's essentially what's happening here. Is Enroute is slicing the corners at an angle so that when these two pieces meet, they're exactly matching each other. So the miter the corners is essentially doing that. It's mitering your corners for this so that they all match. And we can kind of, let's pan over here. We can kind of see closer together what this difference kind of looks like. So we can see the different effects here. So slightly different effects, depending on what you're doing. You may want one or the other, but it's good to know that if you see that center line or the chamfer option, that's what that does right there. So let's take a look at, let's go back. And let's drag our perspective view back over here. All right. Now let's take a look at this option. So we're going to do undo. We're going to go back here a couple steps. There we go. Now we're going to use a contour for each side, and we'll see what this does. So now I'm going to do here. Go to surface, same tool. I'm going to select this shape here. So select the chamfering contour for the shapes. So the first one is always for the outside. So along this outside edge, right here, click there. I hit next, and now for the, it says select the chamfering contour for the holes. That's going to be for the inside. Technically, this big white space in here, this is your hole. And so I'm going to click here. Now that one highlights red, and now we hit apply. And now we've created a very unique looking object. So if we go to top view, go to perspective, now we've created something really dynamic. We've got a little bit of both going on here. So we've got a little bit of the curve on the outside, and then we've got a dip on the inside. So we can very easily create multifaceted type molding or crown molding or any kind of object, really. This even applies to letters. You can do this with letters. You can do this with all kinds of different things. It doesn't have to be just molding. In fact, using the chamfer for letters is actually a really great option if you use the miter, because it'll give you nice, crisp edges like this. So this is a really easy way to create these kinds of things. And the limit really is the sky. Anything that you can draw and get a profile for, you can create using this tool. So these are really simple ones that I've created. I just took a few seconds in Enroute to create these, but if you have a library of profiles or you have, well, the internet is a vast resource for these kinds of things. You have almost infinite possibilities here for different kinds of things you can do. These could be great for door panels. If you're looking to create some unique door panels or cabinet faces or things like that, this 3D option is going to give you that ability to create the more 3D, unique, one-of-a-kind look with any kind of shape really that you want. Now, again, do be aware, this tool here is also very dependent on lines and arcs and the way they're positioned. So just be aware of that as well. So you'll notice here that this particular shape, I have it going in one direction. And then I have this one going in the opposite direction, or same direction, but I have it curved this way. If you run into trouble where maybe one side is not doing quite the right thing, again, try rotating it. Earlier today, when I was doing my testing to get this file ready, I had this rotated the opposite way. I had it this way. Whoops, not my move. Let's do a mirror on this object. Copy. There we go. So I had it in this direction like this, and it just wasn't working out. So it does make a difference. So again, if you find that you're having some issues with this, try changing one thing at a time. The best thing to do, or the worst thing you can do, is to try changing too many things, and then you don't know what really fixed it or what really caused the problem. So what I did in this case was I did two things. The first thing was I changed the direction of the contour. If you go to transform and say reverse open contours, this will reverse the contour to go the other direction. So now you can see that it's going the opposite direction. So that's one way. So try it again, go back in, change your arc direction. See if that helps. If that doesn't help, then do something like I did here. Just do a flip on it. Flip it the other way and see if that makes a difference. Because a lot of times these tools are expecting you to be doing it one way or another way, and that direction really does make a difference. You're going to find that that's a very common theme inside of these Enroute 3D tools. Sometimes they can be very, very picky about the direction of the contour, the way that they're laying, the position, and all that kind of stuff. Just be aware of that when you're doing it. And sometimes you just have to do a little bit of trial and error. All right, so the last one that we wanted to kind of take a look at, another most common tool that we probably see in Enroute when doing 3D, is applying a mesh to our relief. If any of you are going to be doing any kind of work with 3D objects or 3D at all, you're going to notice that you can get 3D objects from online very frequently. You can get them in 3D DXF, 3D DWG, or my favorite is the STL. STL is probably the most robust and probably the most reliable out of all those. But the other two work as well. So you can get like a DXF mesh file, and that works too. One thing to be aware of, and we kind of just briefly, I think, touched on this last time, but we cannot do anything really with this particular object. We can do a few things like scale it and stretch it and squish it. You can kind of do a few different things, right? We can move it around, but we really can't change or toolpath this object. That's going to be the important thing here, is that as is, this object is not toolpathable. Basically, what we have here is just like an O-ring or a donut shape here. The way that we created this, just so that you know, is that we can go to the surface menu and we can create a primitive object. Enroute doesn't allow you to create a ton of objects, but there are a few things in here that you can create in case you need some basic shapes. Otherwise, you might import a file like this using the STL format right here. So we're going to pretend that we downloaded this off the internet and we downloaded it as an STL and we imported it into Enroute. And this is exactly how the object would come in if you had imported something like this from the internet. So we've downloaded it, we've got it in our file. What do we do with this? Well, first of all, we notice that it's red. That indicates to us that it's a mesh. It needs to be converted into a relief before we can actually do anything with it. So we can't toolpath it. We can't do anything like that. We can't output. We have to be able to convert it first. So real easy. The easiest way to do this is I'm going to select, I'm actually going to draw a square on screen that fully encloses this object, just like that. So we've got a square that goes around our donut shape here. And I'm going to select create relief, because again, we always have to have a flat relief for most of our 3D tools, and hit apply. So now you've got to see that our relief has split our donut in half. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to select this and I'm going to move it up because I'm going to illustrate a point here. So what is our depth is 1.9961. It couldn't be an even 2 inches. Okay, so we're going to move it 1.9961 inches up. It's funny. I'm just going to write this down so I don't forget it. Okay, and we're going to move it. We're going to move it up to 0 here. I believe that's where we want that. No, we want, let's see here. Select our object. Bottom corner, we want this to be 0. There we go. Okay, so now our 3D relief is on top of this. So really easy to get this into a mesh, or sorry, this mesh into a relief. We select the relief that we created, the flat relief, and the torus, or the donut, the relief, and then we just hit this little diamond up here, apply mesh to relief. You can also find it under the surface menu. It's right here, apply mesh. I click on that, and that will simply give me several different options down here. Again, we can choose what to do if we want to add it to an existing relief. This case, we're adding it to a flat, so we're going to say add. And I would always recommend the faceted object. If you use the smooth object, sometimes some things happen where it smooths your object the way that you don't want it to. So it kind of takes over your process there, and it doesn't give you the true object. So if you choose faceted, basically what this means is it means that it copies the exact shape no matter what the shape looks like. So it will give you the truest form of your STL, and that's kind of what we want. I'm going to hit apply. Once I hit apply, you'll see it process there for a second, and it doesn't look like it's done anything. Just hit close, and then you're going to get this funny view here. Basically, what we're seeing here is the mesh and the relief are sharing the same space. And so some of the colors coming through. And so I'm just going to deselect everything, click on the center object, and then just move one of them out of the way. Now, one thing you'll notice is that, and we did this on purpose, is that the torus, or the ring, didn't get copied underneath here. So it didn't follow this little curve under here. Well, that is something to be expected. Enroute can't do 5 or 4 axis machines. And so when you create reliefs, Enroute does not allow you to create undercuts. And so what's happened here is it's basically created the shape and pushed it out from underneath and created this object. So if we wanted to create this perfect ring, what we would end up having to do is just cut this object in 2 separate pieces and then put them together. Because remember, we're using 3-axis machines anyway. you guys are running CNC machines with Enroute that are 3-axis machines. So even if Enroute could create that object underneath there, Enroute would not be able to tool path it, or your machine wouldn't even be able to cut it because your bit can't go underneath there unless you have a 5-axis machine. So now that we know that, we're going to go back a couple steps here. So I'm going to undo, and we're going to keep undoing here until we get back to this point right here. So in this particular case, this object's in this particular case, this object is fairly what's the word for it? Symmetrical. So it's the same way on one side as it is on the other side. So it's really no big deal. If you had an object that was not symmetrical, what you would need to do is do the process we're about to do now. Then you'd have to rotate or flip the object upside down and do the process over again, and then glue the pieces together. So let's just kind of go through it now. Now that we've moved this torus halfway down, or this little ring halfway down, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to do faceted object. Now, one of the things that you might ask is, yes, what if this faceted object is blurry? Well, then the object that you have is not very high resolution. So one of the things to remember is that you may want to get a higher resolution object if you don't like the faceted type look that it may produce. You can use the smooth object. It's okay. It's not going to ruin it. Just be aware. In fact, I'll just show you. We'll click on it. This is the smoothing level that allows you to do. So if the more that I go to the right, the more smoothing it does, and the more to the left, the less it does. There's no granular control here. So the problem is that all surfaces throughout the entire object are smoothed off a little bit. So if you only want it to smooth in certain areas but not others, this is really not the place to do that. There's other ways of smoothing off a relief if you absolutely need to. So just be aware, this is kind of one of those tools that allows you to do that, but it's gonna create a lot of smoothing all over, and it may not give you the sharper edges that you might need, things like that. So just be aware of that. So we'll hit apply, close. Again, we have the same thing. This time what I'll do is I'll move the 3D relief out of the way so we can see it. And so then what we would do is at this point, we would just cut two of these half donut shapes out, and then we put them together. In this case, since they're symmetrical, we don't even need to go through the process again. I can just simply hit Control on my keyboard, left click and drag, and I can make a second one, and boom, just like that. I've got two. I can then nest these, tool path them, and send them to cut. So that's applying a mesh to relief. Now, again, you can take these objects and you can flip them if you need to, if both sides are not the same. So that's fairly easy. You do that just like you would any other object inside of Enroute. You can pull up your precision input center and do the rotate here, or you can go into the rotate option over here in the toolbar, which is Shift F7, and that'll pull up the rotate, and you just rotate it in the X or the Y or whichever one that you're using. So, and then you just do the whole process again. So these are some of the simple tools. I know that there are a ton more tools in Enroute. I could sit here all day and all day tomorrow and probably the next day, and we could talk about a lot of different tools. But these are some of the most common ones that we use in Enroute to create a lot of the different 3D objects that we do that are very, very unique. The nice thing here is that a lot of the tools operate under the same premises. So, for example, if we take a look under, actually, let's pull that back so that we have to have a 3D object. So let's go back into Chamfer. So the Chamfer carve is a slightly different variation of the Chamfer. The chamfer center line is a chamfer tool that forces it to be down the center line and then has some additional properties to it. We also have some objects like spin. We also have extrude. Extrude is really nice if you want to extrude an object down the center line of a piece. So you can kind of see in the drawing here that you have an arced piece, and then you have a line that goes down the middle. So if you have a line that you want to extrude it along, you could use the extrude tool. There are other tools in here as well. So there's a lot of experimenting that you can do with one of these. Before we go and talk or ask any questions, one of the things I wanted to quickly just talk about is the Enroute Manual. If you go to your Help menu and click on the Enroute Manual, that'll pull up this document right here. And what I've just done is I just did a Control F and I typed in centerline. Centerline, and I found the chamfering tools. So I can actually go through here, and this document is very detailed. In fact, if we look at just this, it talks about all the things that the centerline chamfer tool does. And this is pages and pages and pages of how this works, what you should do. And now, see, I think that was like 6 or 7 pages of just the regular chamfer tool. And now it talks about the chamfer centerline tool. And we can scroll through here and it talks about how to use that tool. And then it goes how to do some examples, and it gives you walkthrough. It even talks about how to use the Baroque chamfer tool. So again, step-by-step processes. The Baroque is a little more of a different tool. It creates some different things like this. So you can find a ton of information inside the Enroute Manual on how to use these tools. I know for me, I do this a lot because I do tech support a lot and I do training. So I'm familiar with a lot of these tools. So I'm fairly confident with using them. But hey, let's say that you only use these tools once a month or once every couple months to do a job. These are some great ways to come back in here and just take a look at a refresher if you really absolutely need to. Just pull up a refresher, see what the tool does. And the nice thing is here is that the developers of Enroute have actually given you very detailed and intricate descriptions on what the tool is actually doing, so you can kind of understand what's happening in the background. And that's essentially what this whole thing is about. It's talking about, you know, what the software is doing, how it's applying these reliefs, what it's removing, what it's adding, and what the processes are, so you can kind of understand how it's going through it. And then it walks you through an example. So if you have any questions about any of these 3D objects, the Enroute 6 manual is a great resource for this. There are some examples in there that you can use and just walk through, and it'll help you in case you get stuck somewhere. This is a great resource. So hopefully this has been helpful. Kind of getting a little, just kind of dipping our feet in a little bit into what some of these 3D tools can do. Again, a lot of it, when it comes to 3D tools, they're a little bit harder to understand and kind of wrap your head around. But once you kind of play around with it a little bit, I think you'll find you can do some pretty amazing things with these 3D tools in creating some different unique 3D signs or 3D reliefs for cutting out for your customers. So with all that, let's go to some questions. I know I kind of said I went a little long-winded and we didn't kind of rushing through it, but we wanted to get a quick baseline on a few different tools. So what other questions do we have?
Said, how do you address the facets around the return of the object to smooth them out?
So you can do several things. You can use that smooth option that I mentioned. That'll help smooth some of the objects around. Like if you notice that you can kind of see that this 3D shape here is obviously faceted. When I created it, I think I only used 50 slices for 50 slices. So you can kind of see that translated over to my 3D shape. The other option I can do here is that I could very easily just increase the resolution, and at some point the resolution will overcome the detail that your bit is able to cover. Now, you don't want to go excessively high because then you run into a problem with trying to load that much geometry. There's that. The other thing that you can do, and then we didn't really talk about this tool a whole lot, but you can go into the relief edit tool. So I can select a relief, and if I want to, say, smooth one particular object off, I can click on the relief edit, and I have several different tools available to me here to flatten or to create a dome or to bevel or to smooth or to blend an object together. I've got fade, shrink, radius, angles. I've got all kinds of tools in here that would allow me to, smooth off an object. So now, obviously, this is really overdone, but I can take these tools. Let's just try doing a radius of 2 inches here.
Brennan did type more. Said, I was referring to the example when you put the bottom of the ring on top of the relief and applied it to how the return that was generated where the ring undercut. He said maybe draft angle?
Oh, you mean how it created that tall vertical jagged edge. I'm assuming that's what he was talking about there.
Exactly.
Let's just go.
Yep.
Okay, so that in this particular case, so in that particular case where it created that huge, long, jagged edge, I actually just wouldn't deal with that, or I wouldn't address that at all. What you could do is you could add I just wouldn't do it that way, I guess. So what I would do is I would probably go in here, and when I create my relief, there's several ways that you can deal with that. You can apply, let's do this. When you create your relief, and in this case, we have it set at the middle, what you can do is when you apply mesh to relief, it doesn't give me an option here to add any base to it, but when I go to cut this, one of the things that we're going to talk about here in a future episode is we're going to talk about how to do slicing, but you can slice the bottom of this off, and I can just kind of show you real quick. Let's do extract slices. I'm going to take off the mask, set this to 0, slice count 1, and then I want to make this the maximum slice count. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting this to the highest slice count thickness I possibly can. I'm setting the slice count to 1, 0, uncheck mask, uncheck separate layers, mask offset 0. Apply. And what this does is this creates this shape right here. So now I can take this shape and I can set it differently inside of the relief. So for example, if I wanted to add a little bit of a return to the bottom of this, I could either add it via adding a relief. So I could create a relief and just say add to relief and then add a base height to it. I could also do that to the bottom of the relief when I created this flat no thickness. So instead of a flat no thickness, I could say go ahead and add a base to it. That'll help smooth it out. Honestly, though, I don't particularly like creating vertical surfaces inside of Enroute unless I absolutely have to. So what I would do in this case is let's just change our material thickness to reflect a good example here. Let's do 5 inches here. So let's say I wanted a 2-inch return or a 2-inch base underneath this. What I would just do is I would set this object 2 inches above the bottom of the plate so that there would be 2 inches underneath this. Then I would just cut it out with an end mill. And that's way better than and way easier. You get a much better result than trying to cut it with a 3D relief, actually creating that tall. Because what happens is there are some glitching that happens when creating exact vertical surfaces. The toolpath tends to want to grab and create some weird things going on there. So if you can avoid it, what we would just say is create the dome part and then just leave it off the edge of the material or off the bottom of the material, and that will naturally create a vertical bottom here of a certain distance. So when I go to cut this out, I'll 3D cut all of the dome part, and then I'll just run an end mill around the edge, and that'll give me a perfect vertical edge going all the way around. That's how I would probably deal with that.
Okay. Well, let's see
you
here.
could set up a draft angle as well. That would also work. So if you're in a situation where you have to have a vertical surface, you can apply a little bit of a draft angle, and that will help it. So that is actually a good suggestion. But if you're wanting to keep it vertical, straight, without any compromise on the vertical position, then that's probably where you want to go the route where you just cut it off with an end mill and go that direction. That's probably what I would do.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have a couple more questions. Paul said, when toolpathing the donut, will it also cut the yellow square around the donut?
Yes, it will. There's 2 ways of dealing with that. We're gonna talk more about slicing in a future episode, in another episode or another webinar in the future. So we'll be going over that in more detail. But essentially, what I did here by going to extract slices, this is kind of your quick and dirty version of it. Go to extract slices. You remove all these objects. Set it to 1. And then just all you have to do is set it to the maximum thickness. When you set it to the maximum thickness, slice count 1, the software automatically knows what you're wanting to do. It basically understands, it says, oh, he's wanting to do 1 slice, the entire thickness of the object. What he wants to do is slice off that no thickness relief, and that's how you do that. The other way of doing it is a little more complex, but what you can do is, and this is something we'll get into when it comes to the tool pathing of a 3D object, you do not have to tool path the entire thing just by itself. You can use what they call a mask. So if I just drew a couple shapes on screen here, and again, this is not going to be super accurate because I'm just kind of winging it here, but so what I've done is I've created 2 circles, one that matches the inside and one that matches the outside. Now, when I select the relief and those objects, and then I go to toolpath, we'll just pick, oh, not something that small. Let's go bigger here so it doesn't give us too much trouble. You'll notice that the toolpath now only is restricted to this area. So now I don't have to cut the bottom off necessarily. I can just mask off my toolpath to only go in that area right there. So masking is another way that you can do that. Masking can be used in a ton of different ways. I actually think we have a Enroute webinar on masking if you're interested in that, because that one might be something to check into. We do have one for it where I've gone into detail about masking 3D objects and masking other things. But you could very easily mask an object like this. And when it goes to toolpath, now it'll only cut this area and not cut that area out there. So that's another one.
Okay. I think we're almost out of time, but I think we have 2 more questions, so we'll see if we can go ahead and answer those. Francisco said, how could you cut the base relief plane in the donuts example? Oh, same thing we were just discussing.
Yep.
There, okay. Then we have another one. Joe said, can you use roundover bits to speed up toolpath, or would you only use a ball nose bit?
It depends. So if you create the geometry the exact same size as the roundover bit, yes. This also works with like conic tools, for example. If the object that you're creating is the same exact angle as one of your conic tools, then yes, the answer to that is yes. But the problem is 90% of the time, finding a tool that exactly matches the profile that you're trying to create is probably not going to happen. In fact, in this particular example here, if you have a roundover tool that can create this exact shape, you're better off just cutting it in 2D and not even creating the 3D, because all you have to have is a circle on the outside and a circle on the inside, and you just cut it, do an inside cut and an outside cut, and you'd have the shape that you want. So doing 3D in that case wouldn't even really be that helpful. But yeah, so the answer is yes, but with a qualitative yes. So kind of depends. 90% of the time, what you'd want to do is just use a ball end mill of some kind. And when we talk about tool pathing, which I think, let me just take a look here. What is our topic for next month? I thought it was tool pathing, but let me just check.
It is. Yep. On August 11th, we will have our next Enroute webinar, and we'll be talking about tool pathing 3D objects.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, that we'll actually be going into some of that in that episode, tool pathing for 3D. We're going to go into, rough cuts, how to use masking, how to do some of those different things, and what we need to do to the 3D object before we tool path it, getting the prep, overcuts. There's all kinds of stuff that is toolpath related that we could get into that will just kind of take forever. So we'll kind of grab those in another session, because we could go all day with that alone. But yeah, we'll be talking about some of that in that next episode for sure. Is doing some of that.
Excellent. So I think we're just about out of time for this webinar, but hopefully we'll be able to get to more of those questions in our next one when we do talk more in depth about tool pathing. Once again, that'll be on August 11th, and we'll send everyone an invite. And Francisco, if you want to review the steps to only cut the donuts and not the base, I will send everyone a link to this webinar recording. I'll get that uploaded to our YouTube channel so that you can review that. And I think that'll be it. So yes, it'll be able to watch on YouTube. So we'll send you that link. Okay, thank you everyone for attending, and we will see you next month. Thank you, Aaron.
All right, thanks guys.